how to and how not to support your developers or engineers. Some people use one term, some people use another. It has been completely 50-50 depending on the type of company I've worked for. My name's John Erhardt. I've done web development for well over 10 years now. Prior to that, my degree is in electrical engineering. I did circuit development for mobile devices, automotive industry for about another 10 years. That some of that time also included some software development, so it seemed like a thing to transition into. Anyway, um, a lot of times when people talk about project management type of sessions, I noticed that, at least in my experience, it's almost always done from the perspective of a project manager. I have never, software developers or engineers are almost always giving technical talks on code. And I wanted to do the opposite, flip the table around. Um, Part of this idea came from a very bad experience I had 2 jobs ago with a project manager. I'm not going to name names in this talk. The purpose of this isn't to shame anyone. I'm not going to use any company names. I'm going to try to stick to non-gendered pronouns as well to respect people's privacy. Um, but while it's cathartic for me to share these stories, that's not a very interesting talk for the rest of you. So in addition, I wanted to share, things I've learned from these experiences, these stories, and what could have been done better. So first we'll, and again. So, and like I said, nobody's asked me to give this talk, but I think it's something that should happen. So anyway, so first the good. Many years ago, I was at a company, and at least or when the DevSecOps people needed to do their security updates for servers, they wanted an engineer to also be present just in case there was an impact to the application or that maybe the upgrade somehow affected the application so that they could help out. Usually these things go completely smoothly, no big deal. In this particular case, the upgrades to the server brought the site down. And I started to freak out, as I do when things break. And I don't know if the project manager noticed this, but they immediately chimed in and tried to help calm everybody down. And that actually, I remembered that related to my horror story of a project manager who, actively did the opposite. They actively made things more stressful, right? So, yeah, so I always remember that. And actually, I'm now working at a place where that project manager now works. We get to work together again. So, so first so now the interesting stories. Um, so this was a situation where we were building a number of nearly identical websites in Drupal for a large university. And one of the things that some of the sites started to need was single sign-on authentication. I had built that before for one of the sites, and they want to start laying it out. So the project manager was a came to me and told me about this need, asked me what kind of time I needed to get this done. And I explained to him, I said, well, I'm going to need a bunch of hours at first to set this up. Then I got to generate the certificates, send them off to the university's IT team. There's probably going to be some back and forth because there has been in the past. Um, So maybe over a couple of days, I don't know, but those should be short term. A couple of days later, he asked me again. I reiterated exactly what I said. I thought it was maybe to nail down, well, how many hours do you need? And I told him, maybe half a day for the initial setup. I don't know, and then maybe only half an hour. Anyway. So next week, I see my schedule. I did not get what I asked for. Um, and I was working on another client's issues that ended up taking more time than anticipated, than scheduled for. And since I didn't get what I asked for before, I and this I'd worked like this before, it'd never been a problem before. I kept working on the other client's issues. We get to the morning of, or Friday morning. I've now only gone through 3 half-hour blocks of time that I was given to work on this. So I started working on it. The project manager pinged me in Slack. I said, well, he asked me for a status update. I have to go talk to the client. What can I tell them? And I said, well, I'm working on it now. And he, of course, it's in a relatively small office, not much bigger than this, but he's in his office with a door and I'm in the big open plan space. And I'm trying to explain to him that you didn't give me the time that I asked for. I'm trying to do it now. There's this long back and forth. I try to explain something. It was not going well. I finally said, you know what? I'm going to go back to what I'm working on, or I'm going to go back to working on this now. And I turned my Slack status to do not disturb. Was that a good thing to do? I was trying to do the task that I wasn't properly assigned to do. An hour later, I was done. Partially, it turned out because the university had actually automated their delivery of, or setting up those certificates. You could just go on a web form, authenticate yourself, because I was already authenticated as a user, as a developer for them. I could upload the certificate. I didn't. I formatted it correctly as well, so that also helped. Having done it before always helps with experience. Um, but yeah, and it turned out he complained to my boss that he couldn't communicate with me. Um, yeah. So what did what did we learn from this? Well, first off, I'd say that uh, how do we be better communicators? One thing I'd say is work needs to stop being a one-way flow of information. It cannot come down from a project manager that acts like a people manager to tell you what to do. If I knew that part of the creation of the working schedule was that there was a deadline that the project manager needed to meet, well, then I could have worked around to meet that, right? Um, I could have spoken up sooner about the incorrect scheduling, so that the other thing I'll say is that um, having to work like a ping pong ball from client to client to client, sometimes having to work on for two different clients in the same day or more, is very inefficient. I have also worked at companies where that is not what happens. Now, they are larger companies, they are larger projects, so it is easier to set this up. But I worked in a capacity where most of my time was dedicated to one client, and then there was this really tiny client that needed some security updates because anyway, and so they carved out 3 days in one particular week for me to go address that, and it worked out great. And I work much better at that. I think it's a better way to work. Now, I can't speak to how much work it is for project managers to be able to move things around, and not every client is gonna be amenable to that. So there are things that you know barriers to implementing that kind of thing. But yeah, so that's what I'll say about that. Now the I'll take care of it story. So this was a maintenance project for a nonprofit. I hadn't actually done that much work on this site, but while I was working on something completely different, the different project manager pinged me and said, "Hey, the client wants to edit all this content on their staging site using the new styling that we just deployed. And then they want us to move that staging database to production." And the problem with that is that this particular site has users constantly going to production registering for events. And that site was using, I think it was the groups module to create those associations. So you can't just take the staging database. They're not going to have any of those users or those relationships, right? Um, so, and since this wasn't a ticket I was assigned, she was just asking my opinion. I said, I don't recommend that. They said, don't worry, I'll take care of it. I got back to what I was working on. I didn't think about it anymore. A couple of weeks later, maybe it was a week later, I don't know. The PM invited me to a meeting with that client on a video call. And the client was expecting us to do exactly what I had been asked to do. And I was completely um, shocked that why didn't you give me a heads up that I felt blindsided, right? Um, and now we didn't have the time to come up with another solution. So I had to go to my boss and tell him this is what's going on. We came up with a hacky solution to export just the users and the groups tables from the production database, and then take the staging database, write a script, test it to import those users into another database, check that that seemed to work, and then did what they asked. Take the staging database, copy it to production. They're not in sync. This wasn't a situation where the staging database is always updated with a fresh copy of production. And we did it. We don't know if there were some cases that we missed out on. You know, it was a hacky situation. What could we have done differently? I would say set a meeting where we could discuss some options. We could have had a discovery ticket so that I could have time to figure out how to actually accommodate the client, not just do what the client told us to do. One way, as I was writing this up or writing my notes, I thought one of the ways we could have done this is the client could have just done it on production. If we had added the publish and unpublish module, they could create new content using the new styling and schedule when that content is all ready to be published on the same date, and then at the same time unpublish all the content that uses the content types with the old styling. So again, better, more communication would have also helped this situation. So, and now my fun story. So this is a project where I was the only developer for a website that had a very large e-commerce functionality, but also had a very large content publishing. Sorry, let me back up. E-commerce functionality that integrated with a number of APIs, Salesforce, all kinds of email, but also published a lot of content, and there was a subscription component to that as well. It took, and we had a new task to integrate yet another API to accurately calculate sales tax for orders users were replacing, because now we don't just have state tax, we have city tax, we have county tax, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it can vary. And the work on my end was relatively straightforward. It was a lot more work for um, the company that did the fulfillment, that that our website would send the order information to. We now had much more of a two-way communication type of thing. And so we had that took about a year to implement that, and for some QA testing, multiple rounds of QA testing. And just before we were ready to deploy, we had a planning meeting. The client said they had a very specific, the site had to go into maintenance mode so people couldn't place orders at the time. They had a specific message they wanted on the site, and it turned out I had to write code to override the default Drupal maintenance message to do that. So we had a plan for how to do that. We were supposed to start on Monday morning. So a good 15 minutes before the time that following Monday, I started to go and make this code change. Well, the pipe, it's just a one-line change, add it to a template, no problem. The pipeline crashes. There were configuration changes that were different between production and what I was trying to push, and our pipeline was set up to not allow those overridden changes to happen. Turned out that Friday, the project manager had asked me about some problem that the client asked about related to the WYSIWYG. And before I even had a chance to answer, they said, oh, they think they know how to fix it. They'll go take care of it. And I didn't think anything of it anymore. Turns out what they did was they went and just made configuration changes on production, didn't tell me about them. And that caused this block. So I was in the middle of reviewing what those config changes were, getting those included, doing another push, when the PM contacts me and said, hey, the client's on my cell phone. Why isn't this maintenance message up yet? I was so ready to rip into them for the problem that they caused, probably unknowingly, and that's partially why I held back. And I just said there were config changes that in production, so I'm fixing that now. So I did that. Maintenance message went up. Everybody's happy. Now it's hurry up and wait. We have to wait. It was going to take the other company like an hour to get all their changes deployed and happy and what have you. And while we're waiting for that to happen, the PM pings me in Slack and says, hey, the client wants to do some extra testing before we take the maintenance message off and wants to know how to do that. And I said, yeah, they just have to use a user that has the admin role. Anybody that's ever worked with Drupal should know that. I didn't say that, but it was what I was thinking. And so she tried to communicate that. Client had more follow-up questions. I'm trying to answer. She's playing telephone. All of a sudden, I'm invited to a Slack huddle, which is a audio and or video call built within Slack. And I thought it was just the PM. And I can hear this other voice, but it's highly distorted. I recognize the voice, but I can't tell what they're saying. And I don't remember what happened next, but apparently the PM was holding her cell phone up to her computer to communicate. And with all the stress of all this that was happening, and there's a bunch of other stories I haven't even shared about this, I lost my cool for a little bit, and I raised my voice and I said, what is happening? And I said it essentially like that. And they ended the call. A good 5 seconds later, invited me to the Zoom meeting that was already happening between the client and that other company, where I answered their questions, answered their follow-up questions, and all was good. And I didn't think it was a big deal. And then they finally said, yeah, we're ready to go. I deployed my code, took off, they did their testing went well. I took off the maintenance message, then did a follow-up push so that configuration change was no longer different, so we wouldn't have another problem later on, and all was good. Turns out the client complained that they didn't like my tone of voice. Yeah, and complained about that. So what did we learn here? Maybe, communication norms should be established in advance. Don't blindside your colleagues holding a cell phone up to your laptop and not warning them ahead of time that that's even happening. I'm going to again reiterate real teamwork and not top-down mandates. I haven't gone into detail, but there was really a situation at this company where, and I had complained multiple times, that these project managers that really were account managers, and there's a subtle difference, I think, in those titles, are acting like bosses to the engineers. And that's not okay. You can't dictate to me to tell me what to do because you're not my boss. What I and I if this comes off the wrong way, I apologize. I mean it in all sincerity. What I said to one of my bosses is that, I can do. We have to remember that we're a team and we all are working on one goal, which is earning money in this capitalistic society. But I can do a project manager's job very poorly. I am not set up for that. I don't have the skill set for that. But writing software and fixing bugs, that is something that I'm quite good at. But someone who's a project manager does not have that skill set unless they go through the training, that I did and all that. So, let's remember that. So conclusions, yeah, there's no such thing. I don't think there's so much thing as too much communication. I would say that agile software methodology has a lot of benefits despite people's complaints about it. Particularly, I love retrospectives and also backlog grooming. In the sort of Kanban system, those feedbacks, those feedback implementations just don't exist, and you can try to force them, but having the actual structure there, at least for me, is extremely helpful. And I'll reiterate again that having to work on multiple client projects at the same time, for me, is a nightmare. Yeah. Any questions? Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned Slack a few times. Where else were those clients, those projects documented? Like, what other software, project management software were the PMs using or trying to help organize with, if any?
Yeah. I mean, there were tickets that were poorly. It was something else, and then Jira. Tickets would be really just a few sentences added into a thing, and then I would have to flesh it out, right, into actual work. That was a situation where, we didn't even take the time to break things down into reasonable pieces of work. Didn't have sprints. Basically it was if you think of the way, I can't think of the terms, but it really did operate in a last in, first out type of thing. Whatever the client said was the absolute priority today was the thing you had to work on today. And it just kept the excrement kept hitting the ventilation device and getting pushed further down. So that was a joke I was trying to make, and I skipped over it before, and I thought I don't want to not include that, and I was close. Sorry. Yeah. 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 Anyway, anyone else? Yeah.
So it sounds like there was a couple problems. There was lack of communication and respect on the part of the project manager. We're dealing with the problem on the same level. There's a lack of organization planning the work appropriately and having a repository where you can do that. That's very clear. My question to you is, do you feel that that was sort of a product or exacerbated by the agency that you were collaborating with or working for, that it was just part of the culture? Or do you think it's more individual issues with individuals who didn't have that level of respect and communication skills?
I think it's a combination of, I can't speak to the other companies, because I didn't get, to work that much with them. Once we would correctly identify where a problem was, their engineers were able to very quickly solve it, communicate how they had to change the API, and we would move on, right? But I think the culture of that company, and also that maybe that particular project manager, because I had worked for that client almost exclusively for the better part of 4 years. And in that time, they had rotated in 6 different project managers. And I thought I had a great working relationship with a number of them, but not that last one, obviously. So, I mean, at one point, the client asked about, this was unrelated to this task, but had asked about something. They got back to us, said, yeah, we want that done. I didn't have anything else that was pressing, and this was a small thing. So I went and I jumped on it. And the PM literally said to me, you don't work on something unless I tell you to work on it. Yeah, I complained about that. So, and it's not like, we had a relationship that was, there were lots of times where they asked me to work on something and there wasn't a ticket for it. When they asked me to work on it, then I worked on it. And we had a bulk of hours. When we got close to the end of them, I would get a heads up and we would have to stop for the month if that happened. That worked out fine, right? But not in that situation. So, yeah. Anyway, now yeah.
I imagine you've done, have you done like a stand-up meeting, like traditionally, like, do you benefit from that? Do you appreciate that?
I do.
You can chat with the PM and be like, let's go and say,
Yeah.
hey.
In the way this company was set up, with that client, there was a stand-up once a week. Usually it didn't even happen. They would tell me, I think you know what you're working on. Do you agree? And then, right? As I started to transition to work on other clients, that PM would just all of a sudden say, hey, can we meet about this? Usually very last minute. Whereas when you're only working on one project, it's a lot easier to have that daily stand-up, right? And you have the time to talk about, oh, I anticipate this issue might come up, or here's where I'm at, here's what I'm struggling with. You always have that easy space for feedback. Yeah.
Something as simple as scheduling it, leaving it on the calendar and doing it would
Mhm.
solve a bit of this
Yes.
kind of chaotic
Yeah.
feedback.
Yeah. But, blindsiding me holding a cell phone up to a computer, there's no excuse for that. So, thank you very much.